The cursor sharing parameter. This is an interesting one. The default is exact. What exact does is it uses the exact piece of SQL code that is submitted to a database and finds the rows based on that exact string. We'll get into an explanation of what this exactly means further on. But briefly, what force does is it changes any literal values in any SQL code statements into bind variables. In other words, with the force option, you are more likely to match a SQL code statement already in the shared pool. In other words, its optimization plan and its pre-parsed chunk of SQL code is in the shared pool, is more likely to find that piece of SQL code. The problem with that is that since variables are changed to bind variables from literals, the value of the SQL code string is not exact. So it's not going to be as fast when accessing the actual data because it's using a generic bind variable rather than an exact string for the value that it's searching for. If you're searching for a single row in a table of 1,000,000 rows, it is actually more efficient in terms of searching for the data to look for the literal string, particularly if you're using an index. In terms of reuse of the shared pool and very high concurrency and lots of users, they're all executing the same SQL code but with different literal strings. The problem there is that you tend to overstress the shared pool. Then the result is lots of reparsing and lots of re-optimization calculations, and that slows down the performance of the database much more than using the exact option. Generally, the exact option applies to large transactions and data warehouses because you've got a lot of data to search through and there's not very many users. In other words, there's low concurrency. And generally the force option applies to OLTP databases where you've got enormous numbers of users executing the same SQL code statements from within applications, but you need to increase the concurrency capacity of the shared pool. In other words, they're all executing the SQL code statements on small amounts of data. The similar option is basically in between force and exact. Typically, setting cursor sharing to force is often used in OLTP or DSS type environments where SQL code is poorly tuned and you have shared pool issues, high concurrency, and serious performance problems as a result of either the shared pool being sized much too large or simply too many users for the way in which the application is constructed. Optimizer dynamic sampling is a parameter which is set to 1 in general, and it can be set to greater than or equal to 1. All it does is it executes a type of sampling similar to access to statistics, but it executes a pre-calculation of statistics on real data without using statistics before it executes a SQL statement. In other words, it takes the first 10 rows, first 1,000 rows, and decides how it should execute a SQL statement as opposed to using statistics. The time statistics parameter is very important. What this does, it allows internal generation of event, wait event, and latch wait event statistics within the Oracle database, extremely important to subsequent performance tuning. It is not set to true when installing a database. You have to manually go and set it in your parameter file. It has a negligible effect on performance. Those are the basic configuration parameters for statistics, and particularly the use of cost-based optimization on realistic statistics.